Hey guys, welcome to my tutorial on how to create the basics for a weapon system in your game. I'm just going to go ahead and run this to show you what it's going to look like when we're done. So you can see I have a character here, and he can walk around, and you can walk over to guns and pick them up, pressing the F key. And when you have a gun in your hand, you can aim down sights with it, and if you look down, you can see the player looks down towards the ground, and when you look up, he looks up towards the air. And you can also fire, and it fires these little balls I just created, just so you can kind of see the bullets better. And it also has a little muzzle flash, and you can see the character also plays a little animation of him shooting. And you can walk over to other guns and pick them up. So the way I have it set up is that there's two slots. So if you already have one in your hand, the second one will just go on your back. And you can switch weapons at the press of a button. And again, you can fire this gun. And if you try to pick up a gun and you don't have any slots left, it will drop the gun that you currently have, and you'll pick up the new one. And you can see it has some nice physics involved when I drop up, or when I pick up, and when I drop guns. And you can also crouch and shoot as well. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, so this is just the basics. Obviously, there's things that you can add to this to make it even better. You know, like animations for switching guns and all sorts of stuff. But this tutorial is probably already going to be sort of long, so I didn't want to make it any longer. I just wanted to give people a good idea of how they would get started on something like this. And it's using all free content, so you should be able to follow along just fine. And so yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing we're going to need to do is actually get that free content. So if you open up the Epic Game Launcher and go to the Marketplace, I'll show you which ones you need, and I believe they're both free. So the first one you want is called FPS Weapon Bundle, I think. Yeah, FPS Weapon Bundle. So go ahead and download that one so you can see it's free. And then the other one you need is, I think it's called Anim Starter Pack. Yes, this one. So Animation Starter Pack, it's from Epic themselves, and just go ahead and add that to the project as well, or download that as well. And then once you have them downloaded, you can add them to your project. So we're going to create a new project from this, so we can just do it totally from scratch. So come up here and launch whatever version of Unreal you're currently on. I'm on 4.2, 4.2. I'm going to go ahead and launch that one. And then we want to create a new project, so looks like games. Hit next, and we're going to be using the third person as you saw, so select third person, hit next, and I don't think we need any starter content, so you can just leave this blank, and we have to give it a name. I'm just going to call it weapon system, and hit create project, and go ahead and wait for this to create. Alright, so now we got a new project here, and the first thing we need to do is add the two content packs that we just downloaded. So open up the launcher again, and in the marketplace, or sorry, the library tab, scroll down to where you have your vault. And so inside here, it'll show you everything that you've downloaded. And we want to add this one, the animation starter pack. So hit add to project and search for the weapon system and add it to the project. And do the same thing for the FPS weapon bundle. Oh, why did it? I guess it decided to close. We'll open it up again, come back here, scroll down. Oh, I can search FPS weapon. There we go, add project. Add it to the weapon system project. And you can see now it's loaded. All right, so if we come back to our project now, we have our animation starter pack and we have our FPS weapon bundle both added to our project, and they are ready to use. So I'm going to real quickly move this over here just so I can reference it, and we can get started. So the first thing we're going to need to do is, swap out this character for a different character, because you can see if you run it right now, he doesn't quite walk the way we want him to walk. We want him to always be facing away from the camera, since it's going to be a shooting game. And fortunately, we already have a character that does that, since we downloaded this Anim Starter Pack, so we can go ahead and just delete this guy. And the one we want to use is inside of here. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's this UE4 ASP character, and this is the one we want to use for this tutorial because it already has support for a lot of the stuff we need. So to make him the default character, we want to go to Edit, Project Settings, and then on the left, go to Maps and Modes, and under Selected Game Mode, we want to change the default pawn class to our UE4 ASP character. So now if we go back and we run this, you can see I start out as that character, and I can walk around, and it looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and open up this character. There's a few things we're going to need to do in here right off the bat. You can see if we try to compile it, we're getting this warning, and it's saying that there is no crouch action defined. So let's go ahead and define that real quick so we can crouch. So back in the project settings, go over to Input, and under Action Mappings, we want to add one for crouch. So click this plus button, and we'll call it crouch. And I'm going to bind it to the C key. Feel free to bind it to whatever key you want. Where is the C key? I type keyboard. Nope, that's not going to work. C. Oh, there it is. Okay. And while we're here, we might as well create the bindings for the other things we're going to need in this game. So the other actions we're going to need, we're going to need one for aiming down the sights. So I'll call this ADS. And I'm going to bind this to the right mouse button. We need another one for firing or shooting, so we'll call it fire. And we'll bind it to the left mouse button. And we need another one for switching guns. Switch gun. Guns. And I'm just going to use Q for this. Alright, so that's should be all we need to do here. Oh wait, we do need one more for interacting with objects, like picking up guns. So click this plus button again, and make one more, just call it interact, and I'm going to bind it to F. So, alright, so now we can go back to our character, and if we compile this, and you named it correctly, it should just give you that green check mark to say everything's good. And if we run it now and we press C, you can see we are already crouching. Alright, so now that we have our character transitioned over to use the new character and we have crouching working, we can get started on the gun related stuff. So the first thing we need to do for guns is be able to actually pick them up. So to do that, I'm just going to create a interaction interface, and I've done this in many of my other tutorials, so if you've watched them before, this should be very familiar to you. We're basically going to create an interface that lets you interact with items. So right click, and I'm just going to put this in a folder, so a new folder, call it interaction interface. And inside of here, we will create a new interface. So right click, go to blueprints, and select blueprint interface, and call it interaction interface. And we can go ahead and open this up and just edit it real quickly. So we want to add some functions over here. So on the right, there's going to be this new function by default. Just go ahead and rename this one to on interacted. And we want this to take in the character that did the interaction, so like the player. So add new parameter, and the type we want for our character, since we're using the UE4 character, is UE4 ASP character. If you're using a different player character in your game, then you would set it to that. And we'll just call this player. And then we want another one for when you enter the range of an interactable object. So like when you get close enough to pick it up, for example. So make another one and call it on interaction range entered. And again, this one is going to take in the player. So click the plus button, make sure your player type is selected, and we'll call this player. And then we need one more for when you exit the range. So plus button again, on interaction range exited. And this one doesn't need any parameters, at least not for our purposes. All right, so we can compile and save all of that, and then just go ahead and close it. All right, so back in the content directory, we now have our interaction interface. The next thing we're going to want to do is add this interface to our gun. And we don't actually have a gun yet, so we're going to go ahead and create one of those. So go back to the content directory, right click, and make a new folder. And I'm going to call this items. And inside the items folder, we're going to make another subfolder for the guns. Let's call it guns. And then next to the guns folder, we're going to make a blueprint for the items. So make a blueprint. and it's of type actor, and we'll call it BP_item. And we'll go ahead and open this up real quick. And for now, all we really need to do is let's change the, if you go to the class defaults at the top and you drop down this drop down, we can, no, that's not where it is. Class settings and drop down this drop down. Yeah, there it is. So we want to select this generate abstract class checkbox, and that will make it so you can't spawn an instance of the item in the world, and that's because the item is going to be a base class, so we don't actually want to be able to spawn it. And the other thing we can do is we can disable tick, because it never needs to tick. So if you search for tick, I think it might be in the class defaults. Yeah, class defaults, and then search for tick. We want to uncheck start with tick enabled, because we don't need it to tick, so it's just a little optimization that we can do. All right, so now back to the interface. We want to implement the interface in this item class so that items can be interacted with. So go back to class settings, and under interfaces, we're going to add the interaction interface. And you can see it adds it over here, and it also adds our 3 functions over there on the left. And it gives us the option to implement those functions. So for the item base class, we only want to implement these top 2, the onInteractionRange exited and onInteractionRange entered. And we're going to let the gun class that we're going to make later implement this function. So right click on this top one and say implement function, and do it for the middle one as well. So then we have our entered and exit, and I'm just going to move the entered on top because I think it makes a little bit more sense. And then we go ahead and delete these other ones because we don't actually need them. All right, so we can start writing these, and we're going to have to do a little bit more before we can totally finish writing them, but we can at least get it underway. So the first thing we're going to want to do when an item is interacted with, so a gun, for example, or when you get close enough to interact with it, which is what this event is, we want to show that little pop-up that says, hey, press F to interact or pick up or whatever. So to do that, we need to spawn a widget and attach it to the item. So right-click and say create widget. And it wants to know who owns this widget. And we can get that from the player here. So we can say get controller. And since it's a player, we know that it's going to be a player controller, so we can cast to player controller. And again, since we know it's going to succeed, we can right-click and convert it to a pure cast. And just hook that up like so. And hook that up like so. Now, the one thing we need to do before we can continue is actually make a class to specify here for our interaction widget. So let's go back to our content directory and go back to the interaction interface folder. And we're just going to create it inside of here. So right-click, and under user interface, select widget blueprint and call it interaction widget. And go ahead and double click on this so that we can edit it. So this is going to be a pretty simple widget. It's just going to show, like, press F, and then it's going to show what F will do. So over here on the left, we can start out by deleting this canvas panel. We don't need it. We're going to make a size box and drag that in. And we're just making a size box so that we can control the size of the widget that shows. So go ahead and select widget width override and height override so that we can override these values. And for the width, I'm going to set it to 250. And for the height, I'm going to set it to 100. And just so we can see a better visual representation of these values, let's go ahead and change this to custom and type those values in up here as well. So 200 and 100. All right, so the next thing we want is a uniform grid panel to store everything in. And we want a horizontal box. And let's make this horizontal box stretch in both directions. And then let's add a text. So this is going to be on the left, and then we'll add another one, and that's going to be on the right. So for this left one, we just want it to be the F key. So the text will just say F, and we'll put it centered and centered. And for this text, we are basically going to bind to this because it's going to say different things depending on what the item is. So for example, for the guns, it's going to say pick up. But if you had like a health kit or maybe a door, you'd want it to say something different. You'd want the door to say open. You'd want the health kit to say heal, maybe. So we're going to make this bindable. So just for display purposes, I'm going to set this as interact. And again, I'm going to set it to centered and centered, and set it to fill. And I think this one may be set to fill as well. No, let's set this one to auto, and then on this one, we will leave it as fill, and then we'll just add some padding to the F. So back in the padding, just on the left side, add like 15 or 20 or whatever you want. All right, so let's make the F a little bit bigger just so it stands out a little bit more. So font, we'll set this to like, I don't know, 40 maybe. That looks good. We'll keep it bold, and then this, let's just change this to regular text so it doesn't stand out as much. And then the last thing we want is just a background, so we'll add a border and add that to the uniform grid panel. And again, we want to stretch this, so stretch, stretch. And for the brush color, let's just set it to like some transparent black color, so 0, 0, 0 and like 0.5. And there we go. That is the basic of our widget. And the last thing we need to do is just make it so this interaction text is something that we can bind to. So let's go back to our graph real quick, and over here under variables, create a new variable and call it text. And it is going to be of type text. And we want to say that it's instant editable and exposed on spawn, so that way when we create an instance of this widget, we can specify what we want this text value to be. And we can also set it to blueprint read only and private, since it's not going to be changed at runtime. So we can compile and save that. And then if we go back to our designer tab and we click on our interaction text, you can see next to text over here on the right, we have a bind option, and we can select the text variable. So this is essentially just going to bind that text to whatever the text of the text variable is. We can go ahead and click that and compile and save. And now if we go back to our BP item class and we select our interaction widget that we just created, you can see, since we said that it exposed on spawn, you can see the text variable is exposed on spawn. So now all we need to do is pass what we want it to say. So you might be thinking, okay, we're just going to pass pickup here. And we could do that, but then every item, no matter what it was, even if it wasn't something you were going to pick up, would just show pickup. So a better way to do this is to make a function that our children, like the gun class, will be able to override, and so that they can specify whatever they want for this text to show. So just really quickly, on the left here, I'm going to create a new function called get interaction text, and we're going to set this to protected, so that actually we can set it to private, and we can set it to private because we're the ones going to be calling this function, and we can make it pure and constant as well. And I'm just going to add it to a private category. All right, so if we come over here, we need it to return something by default. So in the outputs, we'll add an output for the text, and we'll just call it text. And by default, we'll just return interact. And again, this will never actually show unless the child of the class doesn't actually define this function. So this is kind of what like the default text that it will fall back to if it doesn't know. So now we can come back here to our event graph, and we can drag in this function and hook that up. And again, this is just so your items can show different text if they want to. All right, so now we have the widget being shown. The next thing we want to do is we want to add the widget sort of on top of the item, so that wherever the item is, the widget will also show. So to do that, you need to add a widget component. So we'll say add widget component. And we can leave this as self, and we can leave this unchecked as well, but the relative transform, let's just go ahead and split that, so that way we can compile it. And we want to save this value so that we can later remove it. So right click and promote to variable. And I'm just going to call this the interaction widget component. And we can set this to private category and set it to private. So now that we have our widget component created, we need to associate this widget with this widget component. So if we drag up this and we say set widget, it will allow us to do that. So we just basically need to hook from here to here. So let's go ahead and drag that across. And I'm going to make some reroute nodes just by double clicking and kind of move it around here so it doesn't look so ugly. All right, that looks good. So now we're pretty much done creating the widget, but there are some properties on the widget that we want to set so that it displays correctly. So let's go ahead and take this and drag it down a little bit so we can create a reroute node. And the things we want to set, first and foremost, is we want to set the widget space. So say set widget space, and we want to set this from world to screen. And what screen space does basically means that it's going to stay visible even if the player walks in front of it. It's like a screen space widget, so it's not going to do any depth testing. So it's really good for things like text or icons in your world. And the next thing we want to do is we want to set it so that it draws at the desired size. So set draw at desired size. We want to set this to true. And we're just doing that so that it draws at that 250 by 100 resolution that we set it to, and it doesn't try to do anything else. And we also want to set the collision to disabled. Set collision enabled, and then you have to set it to no collision. And that's for obvious reasons. We obviously don't want to be able to collide with this widget in any way. It's just purely a visual thing. And then finally, we want to attach the widget to the item. So drag off of this and say attach to component and hook that up. Oh wait, that wasn't the right one. So attach to component, I think it's the bottom one. You want to make sure that it's going into the target and not the parent. So attach to component. And the parent we want to attach to is going to depend on what the item is. So just like we did for the interaction text, we want to be able to get that from the item, like the child item. So we're going to make another really simple function, and it's just going to be called, so click the function button and call it get interaction text attach. So this is where the text is going to attach to, and we can drag this into the private and set it to private. So by default, we're just going to return our scene root because that's really the only option we have. So drag that in, and you can just hook that up like that, and then drag it in. And I'm going to rename this to attach component. And we'll override both of these functions in our gun class, so they'll make a little bit more sense once we do that. And we can set it to pure and constant as well. And compile and save that, and then back in the event graph, we can drag in the get interaction attach and hook it up to there. And finally, we want to change all of these to snap to target so that it snaps directly to where we're telling it to attach to. All right, so that is our on interaction range entered function finished. The next one we need to write is the on interaction range exited. So this one's going to get called whenever the player walks away from an item, so he's no longer close enough to pick it up. And the first thing we're going to do is drag in our interaction widget component. And we really want to see if this exists, and if it does exist, we want to destroy it so that it doesn't show anymore. So a really handy way to do this is you can right-click here and say convert to validated get. And you can see it changes the node a little bit, so we now have an is valid pin and an is not valid pin. And then it also gives us the variable itself. So if it is valid, we can drag off of this and say destroy component, like so. Now, one thing we can do, we're technically finished here, but one thing we should probably do just as a safety precaution is when this function gets called for on interaction range entered, and we go and we create the widget, before we do this, we should probably make sure that the widget doesn't already exist, just in the rare case, and I don't know exactly how this would happen, but just in case this gets called twice and the widget's already created, we don't want to create the widget again. So just like we did down here, I'm just going to copy this and paste it up here and hook it up. But instead of is valid, we want to drag off of is not valid. So we're just saying if the widget doesn't already exist, then go ahead and create it. And again, that'll probably never actually be a problem, but just in case it is, it's just a really simple safety check. Okay, so now that we have these functions finished, we just need to call them from somewhere. And the location we're going to call them from is the player, because the player is the one who's going to be entering and exiting the interaction range of these items. So if we go back to our player, and the collision we want to use to do the detection of if it's close enough to an interactable object or not is our castle component. this capsule around our player. Whenever that overlaps with an item, we want to trigger these events. So we're going to right click on this and say add event and add component begin overlap. And we're going to also add one for on component end overlap. And let me just check my notes so I don't mess this up. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so in the on component begin overlap, the first thing we want to do is we want to see if the actor that we overlapped with implements the interaction interface. So we can just drag off of this and say does implement interface. And the interface that we're checking for is the interaction interface. And we can drag off this return value and do a branch to check if it's true or false. So if it's true, we want to call this on interaction range entered event. So drag off of this guy, bring it down here a little bit, and say on interaction range entered. And we'll hook that up like so. Just clean it up a little bit. And of course the player is ourself, so get ref to self. Like so. So that's pretty simple, that's all we need to do there. We basically want to do the exact same thing for the on exited. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this and paste it here. Hook that up. But instead of calling on interaction range entered, we want to call on range exited. So on interaction range exited. And we no longer need this either. All right, so now we have our interaction range entered and exited. So at this point, we can pretty much test it. The only thing we really need to do now is create an instance of one of these items so that we have something to test with. So back in the content directory and back in items, we have our item class, and then we made this guns folder. So let's go ahead and actually create the base gun class. So right click and create a new blueprint class and select select all actors, and because we want to make it of a type BP item. So search for BP item. So this is going to be the parent. And hit select, and we're going to name it BP gun. And then we can go ahead and double click on this to open it up. So double click on it to open it up. And inside of here, we want to add a few components that all of our guns are going to have and share. So click add component. First one we're going to want is a skeletal mesh. And the skeletal mesh is going to be for the gun itself, like the gun model itself. And the next thing we want is a sphere collision. And this is going to be used to detect collision on if the player is close enough to pick up the gun or not. And I'm going to go ahead and drag the sphere onto the skeletal mesh just so it becomes a child of it, like so. And the last thing we want to do is change, oh, it already is set, never mind, so I guess we don't have to do that. And let me just make sure this is set to overlap all. Okay, it is, so the defaults are correct. We don't have to change anything there. Yeah, I think this is all we need to do for right now for this gun class. We'll add more stuff to it later. But we have the base gun class now, so now we can actually create childs of this for our different types of guns. So back in the content directory, we're going to make a new blueprint. And it's going to be of type BP underscore gun. And you can make as many of these as you want for as many different guns in your game that you have. So we'll hit select. And the first gun is going to be our, I think it's the M4, so say BP M4. And if we double click on this now, and we select our skeletal mesh, currently it's not set to anything, we want to change it to the M4. So we'll search for SK underscore, I guess it's called AR4 in here, but whatever, close enough. So SK underscore AR4, and you want to select the one that has underscore X at the end. And all that is it's saying that it points along the X-axis. You can see how it's aligned with this red axis here. If you don't select that one, it's going to be aligned along the Y-axis, which is not what we want. So make sure you select the ones with underscore X. And we can compile and save that. And we can go ahead and create the other ones while we're here. So let's just copy and paste this. And copy and paste it again. All right, so let's rename this one to BP underscore AK-47. I think that's one of the guns. And BP underscore, I think it's VAL is the other gun, I'm not sure. So let's open up the AK-47 and open this guy up. And for the skeletal mesh, we want to change it to the AK, so find the AK. And again, make sure you select the one with the underscore X at the end, like so. You can see in our viewport, now it's showing the AK. And finally, we want to do it for this other one, the VAL. I don't actually know what a VAL is. Maybe somebody in the comments will know and could tell me. But let's find it. Where's it go? Here we go. And again, make sure you get the one with the _x. And yep, that looks correct. Let's compile and save this. And one thing I'm just noticing here real quick is that this sphere collision is a little bit too small. We want to make it a little bit bigger so that you don't have to be like literally right on top of the gun to pick it up. So let's go back to the gun base class and let's just change this sphere to have a radius of like 128. And we compile and save that. Save all. And then we can add these guns to the world. So let's go ahead and just drag one of these in. Or well, all of these in. So let's drag the M4, the AK, and the VAL. So hopefully, if I did everything right, this is going to work. So let's go ahead and play it. And if we go over and we walk over the M4, you can see it says F to pick it up. And if I walk away, it goes away. And the other one should do the exact same thing because they're all sharing the same base class. So yeah, that looks pretty good so far. So I think at this point I'm going to continue the tutorial in the next part of the video. So I'll see you in part 2.